Aisha had always lived in the same small rural town, a place where everyone knew everyone, and news traveled faster than the wind. On the surface, it seemed peaceful, with fields stretching far into the horizon and birds filling the mornings with soft songs. But beneath that calm life was something much harder for Aisha to bear: the constant judgment of people who never took the time to understand her. From her childhood, Aisha had been the quiet one. She spoke little, worked hard, and stayed out of trouble. She wasn't the type who talked back or defended herself. She believed that patience would earn her respect someday. But patience, she learned, did not always change people's minds. Many still saw her as someone who didn't matter much, someone who could be overlooked without guilt. They didn't see her kindness or the strength she carried inside. They only saw what they wanted to see. Aisha lived alone in a small, old house near the edge of town. It wasn't much, just 2 rooms, cracked windows, and a roof that complained loudly whenever it rained. But it was her home, and she kept it clean as best she could. Every morning she woke before sunrise, washed her face with cold water from the metal bucket, and stepped outside to start her day. She worked in a small shop in the town center, sweeping floors, organizing shelves, and helping customers. The pay was small, but she never complained. People often whispered behind her back. They said she was slow, that she wasn't smart enough, that she would never become anything. Some called her unlucky. Others said worse things that cut her heart quietly. Aisha never understood why people were unkind. She never hurt anyone, never spoke badly of anyone, and always tried to help when she could. But sometimes, being soft in a hard world makes people think you are weak. Even though she heard the whispers, she kept going. She carried her sadness inside, where no one could see it. When she walked through the busy market streets, she kept her eyes low, hoping no one would stop her with unnecessary remarks. Sometimes, she wished she could disappear, just to have one day without judgment. But she kept walking, kept working, kept living, because that was all she knew. Her co-workers at the shop did not treat her badly, but they did not treat her well either. They would hand her the hardest tasks, expecting her to do them without hesitation. And she did. Not because she was weak, but because she believed in doing her job with honesty. She wiped the counters until they shined, packed goods neatly, and greeted customers with a shy smile. Most customers barely noticed her, but there were a few old women who appreciated her gentleness. Aisha never expected praise. She only wished for a little kindness, a small sign that she mattered. But the town people were busy with their own lives, and she was easy to ignore. Still, she held on to hope quietly, like a small candle in a dark room. On her way home after long shifts, she would walk along the dusty road, watching the sun sink behind the hills. She often paused near the fields to breathe in the cool air. This was the only time she felt free from everyone's opinions. In the open fields, the wind didn't judge her, the sky didn't look down on her, and the earth didn't whisper anything cruel. She felt safe there, even for a moment. Despite everything, Aisha had a heart full of kindness. She would stop to help an elderly man carry his groceries. She would comfort a crying child she passed by. She would pick up litter near the market, even though people laughed and said it wasn't her job. But kindness rarely gets applause in a world where loudness is mistaken for strength. One evening, while walking home from work, she saw a stray dog limping near the road. Its fur was dirty, and its eyes looked tired. Aisha knelt beside it, speaking softly, afraid it might be scared. The dog wagged its tail weakly. Without thinking twice, she carried it home in her arms. She washed its fur, gave it some of her dinner, and let it rest on a soft cloth. The dog wasn't much, just a small creature in need, but caring for it made her feel needed too. She named the dog Sitara, because its eyes reminded her of tiny stars. Sitara quickly became her quiet companion. When she cried silently at night, Sitara rested its head on her lap. When she laughed softly, something she rarely did, Sitara wagged its tail happily. Having a small friend made her lonely world feel a little less empty. The townspeople, however, didn't understand why she cared so much for a stray animal. Some even said she was wasting her time, but Aisha didn't mind. She had learned by now that people always had something to say. Sitara, at least, gave her comfort without asking anything in return. One of the few places Aisha felt somewhat safe was the old library near the school. It was a quiet building, with large wooden doors and tall shelves, filled with books that smelled of dust and years of stories. The librarian, an old woman with silver hair and kind eyes, liked Aisha. She always greeted her warmly and encouraged her to read as much as she wanted. Aisha loved sitting in the corner by the small window, reading simple stories that gave her hope. She liked stories about people who struggled but eventually found their light. Sometimes, when she closed a book, she wished her own life could be like those stories. She wished there was someone who saw her differently. Someone who didn't believe the cruel words people said. Someone who could look at her and say she mattered. Little did she know, someone already had. Rayhan, the quiet cowboy who lived on a ranch outside the town, had seen her many times. He wasn't the kind of person who talked much or mixed with the crowd. People described him as distant, but he simply preferred calm over chaos. From a distance, he had watched Aisha many times when she helped the elderly, when she fed stray animals, when she left the shop late after finishing extra work. He noticed things no one else cared to see. He saw how tired she looked at the end of each day. He saw how she forced a smile even when she was hurt. He saw how she took care of Sitara with gentle hands. He saw the strength she hid behind her silence, and he wondered why no one else saw it. Aisha didn't know that someone observed her with respect, not judgment. She lived in a world where she believed she was invisible. But Rayhan saw her clearly. As someone who carried a quiet dignity the world failed to notice. Still, she lived her days believing she was unimportant. She continued working hard, helping others, and hoping life would someday show her a little kindness. She didn't dream of luxury or fame. She just wanted to be treated with respect. But life is strange. Sometimes it takes you to the lowest point before lifting you higher than you ever thought possible. And without knowing it, Aisha's life was slowly moving toward a moment that would change everything. A moment when the world that once ignored her would finally see her worth. A moment when the quiet cowboy, who had watched her silently for so long, would step forward in front of everyone and take her hand, not out of pity, but out of genuine respect. That moment was still far ahead. But her story had already begun to change. Quietly, softly, just like her. Rayhan had always been a quiet soul, the kind of man who preferred silence over noise. People in the town often said he was difficult to understand, not because he was unfriendly, but because he spoke only when necessary. He lived on the outskirts of the town, where the land stretched wide and open, and the wind carried the smell of grass and soil. His small ranch stood alone, surrounded by wooden fences and tall trees that whispered in the evenings. To him, this peace was enough. He spent most of his days tending to his animals, horses, cows, and a few goats. Animals, unlike people, didn't judge. They didn't gossip or pretend. They simply responded to kindness, and Rayhan had plenty of that. He woke before dawn each day to feed them, brushing the horses gently and checking the fields to make sure everything was in place. It was simple work, but he loved it. Even though he stayed away from unnecessary conversations, he wasn't unaware of what happened in the town. He heard things when he went to buy supplies or deliver milk. He heard the laughter, the gossip, the careless words people said, and many times he heard Aisha's name included in those conversations. He always wondered why she was treated that way. The tone people used when they spoke about her bothered him. It wasn't right to judge someone without understanding them. Rayhan had noticed Aisha long before the town began talking about her. He first saw her when she was helping an elderly woman carry heavy bags near the market. While the busy crowd moved around them, Aisha walked patiently, matching her steps with the older woman's slow pace. It was a simple act of kindness, but something about it stayed with him. From then on, he noticed her more often. When he visited the shop where she worked, she always greeted him shyly, never meeting his eyes for long. She worked quietly, organizing things carefully and making sure everything was in order. He saw the tiredness on her face, but he also saw the strength in her movements. She never complained, even when others gave her the hardest tasks. Rayhan admired that. In a world where many people showed false confidence, Aisha carried a gentle strength that was rare. But it frustrated him that others didn't see it. Instead of appreciating her, they made assumptions and spoke about her carelessly. The more he observed, the more he realized how lonely she seemed, walking through life with no one to support her. Once, he noticed her sitting alone near the library steps, her head lowered. Sitara, her stray dog, sat beside her, resting its head on her knee. Aisha stroked its fur slowly, as if that tiny act gave her comfort. Rayhan could tell she had been crying, though she tried to hide it. He didn't approach her. He didn't want to embarrass her. But he felt something tighten in his chest, a quiet sadness for someone who deserved much better. Rayhan wasn't a man of big emotions or loud actions. He believed in helping others quietly. If he could make someone's life easier, without drawing attention, he preferred that. So when he saw Aisha struggling in small ways, he found himself wanting to step in, even if she never knew. He began observing her routine without making it obvious. He noticed how she walked home each evening, following the same dusty road. Sometimes she looked exhausted, carrying small grocery bags or bundles. On days when the weather was harsh, when the sun was too strong or the wind too cold, he felt worried, hoping she reached home safely. He never followed her closely, never made her feel watched, but from a distance, he made sure she was okay. There was one evening he remembered clearly. The sky was dark with thick clouds, and a storm was approaching. He had finished covering his hay storage and was about to head inside when he saw Aisha hurrying down the road. She held her scarf tightly, trying to shield herself from the strong wind. Before she could reach her house, the rain began pouring heavily. She paused under a large tree, shivering slightly. Rayhan wanted to offer her shelter, but he knew she might feel uncomfortable. So instead, he quickly took an extra umbrella from his home and walked toward the tree, pretending he was heading somewhere anyway. When he reached her, he handed her the umbrella without saying much. Their eyes met for a moment. She looked surprised, almost unsure if she should accept it, but then she nodded softly and whispered a small thank you. Rayhan simply tipped his hat and walked away before she could say more, leaving her with a little protection from the rain. That small moment stayed with him for many days. He hoped it helped her, even if just a little. As time passed, Rayhan learned more about Aisha through what he observed. He saw how she always put others before herself. She gave her lunch to a hungry child once. She helped a woman fix her broken basket. She stayed late at the shop to finish work. Others left unfinished. He also noticed how people often took advantage of her kindness. Some expected her to do their tasks without gratitude. Others spoke unkindly to her, thinking she would remain silent. And she did remain silent. Not because she didn't feel pain, but because she didn't know how to defend herself without causing trouble. Rayhan felt a quiet anger rise inside him whenever he saw such unfairness. But he also knew Aisha would not want him to create a scene. She avoided conflict, even when she was right. So he looked for other ways to support her, ways she wouldn't see. He started visiting the shop more often, buying small things he didn't really need. Soap, tea, cloth, just so she would have lighter tasks on those days. When he noticed her struggling with heavy boxes, he waited until she stepped aside and then offered to carry them. She always looked surprised when he helped, as if kindness was unfamiliar to her. There were times when Rayhan overheard people saying harsh things about her. He never joined the conversation. He simply gave them a quiet stare, the kind that made people think twice. His silence carried weight. People respected him not because he was loud, but because he spoke only when necessary. When someone lives with honesty and consistency, people naturally listen, and because of that, even his silence could make a difference. Still, Aisha had no idea how closely Rayhan observed her life. She didn't know he admired her strength. She didn't know he saw her as someone brave, someone who carried more hardship than most could handle. To her, He was just a quiet cowboy who visited the shop sometimes, but to him, she was someone special. Someone who deserved better than the treatment she received. Someone who reminded him of calm mornings, soft, steady, and full of quiet beauty. Rayhan often wondered why the town judged her so easily. He believed that people often misunderstood silence. They thought quiet people were weak or lacked confidence. But he knew that silence could hide deep emotions, untold stories, and strength people couldn't see. Sometimes, while brushing his horses at sunset, he would think about her. He wondered what she thought when she walked home alone. Did she know there was someone who cared? Did she know her kindness mattered? He wished he could tell her, but Rayhan was not a man who expressed feelings easily. He needed time, and he needed the right moment. He didn't realize that life was slowly creating that moment for him. One afternoon, when he went to the shop, he noticed that Aisha was quieter than usual, her eyes red, her face pale. She moved slower, as if carrying an invisible weight. He wanted to ask what happened, but he knew she wouldn't share her troubles. So instead, he placed the items he bought on the counter gently and said a soft thank you, hoping his calm presence gave her a little comfort. Later, he saw her leaving the shop earlier than usual. She looked exhausted, as if the world had taken too much from her that day. Rayhan felt a heavy ache in his chest. He wished he could take her pain away, even if just a part of it. The more he saw her struggles, the more determined he became to help her quietly. He didn't want recognition or thanks. He simply wanted her life to be a little less lonely. What he didn't know was that soon, he would no longer be able to help her from a distance. Life would bring them into the same moment in a way he never expected, and the world that ignored Aisha would witness something they never imagined. The quiet cowboy stepping forward and changing everything with a single, sincere gesture. But for now, Rayhan continued watching over her, silently, patiently, with a heart that understood her more than she knew. Aisha had always lived her life with quiet strength. But even strength has limits. The days had been getting harder for her without any clear reason. It felt like life was slowly pushing her toward a point she wasn't prepared for. It wasn't just one incident, it was a collection of small, painful moments that began to weigh heavily on her heart. For months, Aisha had given her best at the shop. She arrived early, worked long hours, and stayed late whenever the owner asked her to. She didn't complain when others left their tasks undone and she had to finish them alone. She didn't argue when customers blamed her for mistakes she never made. She believed that honesty and patience would eventually earn her respect, but instead of appreciation, she noticed something different, whispers growing louder, smiles turning colder, and eyes judging her more harshly. It began with simple comments. Someone would say she was too slow. Someone else said she didn't understand things quickly. Then came the rumors, the kind that travel through small towns like wildfire. Aisha didn't know where they started or why, but suddenly people treated her as if she was the problem. The owner of the shop, who once trusted her, began doubting her without reason. He questioned her work, checked her tasks twice, and made her feel like she couldn't do anything right. One day, after she finished sweeping the floor, the owner called her into his office. He didn't look angry, just uncomfortable, as if he wanted to avoid looking at her. He told her that business was slow and that he needed someone more active. He didn't use harsh words, but the message was clear. He no longer wanted her there. Aisha stood silently, holding her fingers tightly to stop them from shaking. She didn't argue, didn't ask why, didn't defend herself. She simply nodded and walked out of the shop with her heart breaking quietly inside her chest. Losing her job wasn't just about losing money. It was about losing the only place where she felt she was doing something meaningful. It was the place where she spent most of her day, the place where she tried her best, the place where she believed she had earned a small sense of belonging. But even that had been taken away from her. For the first few days, Aisha stayed inside her small house, sitting on the floor with Sitara beside her. She stared at the walls, wondering what she had done wrong. She questioned herself over and over. Maybe the rumors were true. Maybe she wasn't good enough. Maybe she really didn't have any worth. The thoughts hurt her deeply, but she couldn't stop them. Rayhan, who had grown used to seeing her on the road every evening, noticed her absence immediately. He wondered why she didn't go to the shop anymore. He hoped she wasn't sick. He didn't want to appear intrusive. So he simply observed from a distance, waiting for a moment when he could understand what was wrong. Days passed, and he finally saw her walking slowly one afternoon, carrying Sitara in her arms, as if she needed the little dog's comfort more than ever. Her steps were different, heavy, unsure, almost fragile. Her face looked pale, her eyes tired. It didn't take much for Rayhan to understand that something painful had happened. He didn't approach her directly, knowing she might not be ready to talk, but he walked near enough to make sure she reached home safely. The quiet ache in his chest deepened when he saw her unlock her door with trembling hands. Aisha's life became more difficult after losing her job. The little savings she had were disappearing quickly. She cut down her meals to make them last longer. She fixed her old clothes instead of buying new ones. She avoided going into town because she didn't want people to ask questions or make comments. She didn't want anyone to see her sadness. She felt as if the entire world was watching her fail. But even in her hardest days, she still cared for Sitara. She fed the little dog before feeding herself. She talked to it softly at night because Sitara was the only one who listened without judgment. When she cried silently, Sitara curled beside her, as if trying to take away some of her pain. Rayhan, noticing her struggling more each day, could not stay silent anymore. He wanted to help, but he wanted to do it in a way that wouldn't make her uncomfortable. So he started with small acts of kindness. He left a basket of fresh vegetables near her door early in the morning, knocking once and leaving before she opened it. He placed a small container of milk there some evenings. He made sure the items looked like simple gifts anyone could have left. Each time Aisha opened the door and saw the basket or the milk, she felt confused but grateful. She didn't know who was helping her, but the kindness warmed her heart. For the first time in weeks, she felt a small spark of hope. Rayhan also found small tasks he could offer her at his ranch. One morning, he walked toward her house with a gentle knock. When Aisha opened the door, she looked surprised to see him standing there. Her eyes widened slightly, as if she wasn't sure she should be happy or nervous. Rayhan greeted her softly, told her he needed help sorting some things at the ranch, and said he would be happy to pay her for her time. He didn't mention her job or ask why she wasn't working anymore. He kept his tone calm and respectful, giving her space to breathe. Aisha hesitated at first, feeling unsure, but something in his voice made her believe he genuinely needed help. So she agreed. At the ranch, Rayhan gave her easy tasks counting supplies, dusting shelves, checking the animals' feed. He made sure not to overwhelm her. He noticed how careful she was, how she double-checked everything, how she handled the animals gently, speaking to them as if she understood their feelings. Watching her work gave him a deep sense of peace. Aisha, on the other hand, felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, a sense of purpose. Working at the ranch calmed her mind. The quiet landscape, the sound of horses softly snorting, the warm sunlight touching the fields, it all felt like medicine for her tired heart. She didn't know that Rayhan was trying to give her strength without letting her feel pity. He wanted her to feel capable, not helpless. He wanted her to see herself the way he saw her, strong, kind, and deserving of respect. As days turned into weeks, Aisha slowly regained her balance. She still felt the sting of losing her job, but she wasn't collapsing anymore. She woke up with a reason to step outside, and that reason gave her comfort. She didn't smile often, but sometimes, while feeding the horses, her lips curved gently without her noticing. Rayhan saw those small smiles. They were rare, delicate, but they meant everything to him. He never commented on them, never made her feel watched. But inside, he felt the quiet satisfaction of knowing he had helped her without taking away her dignity. Still, Aisha didn't know that Rayhan was behind the morning baskets, the milk, or the small gestures that made her days easier. She didn't know that he walked the road quietly at night to make sure no one bothered her. She didn't know how often he paused during his ranch work, wondering if she was okay. But life has a way of revealing truth at the right time. And sooner than they both expected, a moment would come when the whole town would see something they never thought possible. The quiet cowboy stepping into the center of everything, standing by the woman everyone had ignored, and telling the world with just one gesture that she had more worth than anyone ever gave her credit for. For now, Aisha continued her quiet days, slowly healing, unaware that a turning point was approaching. A moment that would change not just her life, but the way the entire town saw her. And it all began with those small acts of kindness from someone who understood her pain without needing to hear her words. The days at the ranch slowly filled Aisha's life with a kind of peace she had never known before. Each morning when she stepped out of her small house, the air felt lighter. Sitara trotted beside her happily, wagging its tail as if it understood that its owner finally had a reason to smile again. The dusty road to Rayhan's ranch no longer felt lonely. The soft sound of the wind brushing through the tall grass comforted her in a quiet way. Rayhan always greeted her with a gentle nod when she arrived. He never asked personal questions or made her uncomfortable. He respected her silence, and somehow, that made her feel safe. In a world where people demanded explanations from her, his calm presence felt like a shelter. Aisha worked carefully at the ranch. She cleaned the horse stalls with slow, steady movements. She refilled water buckets, brushed the horses' manes, counted tools, sorted supplies, and helped with small repairs. Rayhan taught her simple tasks, showing her how to handle ropes, how to care for the animals, and how to organize things in the storehouse. He taught her with patience, explaining things softly and never rushing her. One afternoon, she was brushing a young horse that kept moving nervously. Rayhan walked over, stood beside her, and placed his hand gently on the horse's neck. The horse calmed down almost instantly. Aisha looked at him with quiet surprise, impressed by the calm way he handled the animals. Rayhan simply said, "They listened to kindness," and walked away to continue his work. She carried those words with her all day. Working with him felt natural. There was no pressure, no fear of making mistakes, no harsh judgment. She realized she had never experienced such understanding before. Most people spoke loudly, commanded quickly, and expected immediate results. But Rayhan was different. His silence spoke with respect. His actions spoke with sincerity. As time passed, Aisha became more confident. She spoke a little more, though her voice remained soft. She laughed quietly sometimes when Sitara chased the chickens around the yard. Rayhan often noticed those moments from a distance. He didn't join in, he simply watched with a kind expression, feeling grateful that she was healing. The townspeople, however, began noticing something unusual. For the first time in years, they saw Aisha walking with steady steps. Her face brighter than before. Some people wondered where she was going every morning. Others made assumptions, as people often do. They whispered and created stories without knowing the truth. Aisha didn't pay attention to the whispers anymore. The ranch had given her something much more valuable than a job. It had given her peace and purpose. It had given her space to breathe. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Rayhan called her to the front of the ranch. She walked over slowly, wondering if something was wrong. Rayhan held a wooden box in his hands. He opened it and showed her a pair of small gloves, soft, strong, and perfectly sized for her. "These are for you," he said simply. "Your hands get tired. These will help." Aisha stared at the gloves, surprised. No one had ever given her something so thoughtful. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. Her throat tightened with emotion, but she forced herself to breathe steadily. "Thank you," she whispered, holding the gloves gently as if they were made of glass. Rayhan nodded once. He didn't need her to say more. Her eyes already spoke enough. After that day, she wore the gloves every time she worked. They protected her hands, but more importantly, they reminded her that someone cared enough to think about her comfort. It was a small gift, but it held a big meaning in her heart. One morning, as Aisha was arranging tools inside the storehouse, she overheard two women walking past the ranch gate. They spoke loudly, unaware that she could hear them. They said she was wasting her time. They said she would never improve her life. They said she was still the same person who was not good enough for anything. The words stung her like they always did. Aisha paused, squeezing her hands together, forcing herself not to let the pain break her again. She didn't want to cry. Not here. Not now. But Rehan had been standing nearby, fixing the fence. He heard every word. He didn't react immediately, but his jaw tightened. He waited until the women walked away, then walked toward the storehouse where Aisha stood. She kept her head down, pretending to work, hoping he hadn't heard anything. But Rehan quietly took the tool from her hand and placed it aside. "Don't let their words touch you," he said softly. "They speak without understanding." Aisha's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't let them fall. It felt strange having someone defend her, even indirectly. She wasn't used to it. Rehan continued. "You work hard. You care for everyone. That's worth more than anything they say." His voice was steady, honest, and warm. And for the first time in a long time, Aisha believed someone's words. She whispered a soft, "Thank you," her voice trembling just slightly. Rehan nodded once and returned to his work, letting her absorb the comfort in silence. From that moment on, something shifted between them, not in a dramatic way, but in small, meaningful ways. Aisha no longer felt invisible around him. She felt seen. She felt understood. Rehan, too, began noticing how deeply Aisha cared for everything around her. She helped a small injured bird near the barn, feeding it tiny seeds until it was strong enough to fly. She planted small flowers near the fence even though no one asked her to. She cleaned the water troughs with extra care, so the animals always had fresh water. These were little things, but they mattered. They were signs of a heart that refused to give up on kindness, no matter how much the world hurt her. One afternoon, the town announced a small gathering at the community center. It was a simple event: songs, food, and a few activities. Aisha was unsure if she should attend. She usually avoided such gatherings because she knew people would stare, whisper, or judge. But Rehan encouraged her softly, saying she should take a break and enjoy the evening. She decided to go, though her heart felt heavy with nervousness. The community center was filled with people. Some greeted her. Others looked at her with the same old judgmental eyes. Aisha kept her gaze low and moved slowly through the crowd. She felt alone again, as if the progress she made at the ranch had disappeared the moment she stepped back into town. When she picked up a plate of snacks, someone accidentally bumped into her, causing the plate to slip. A few people laughed quietly. Someone whispered something unkind. Aisha froze, feeling the old pain return all at once. Her face turned pale, and she wished she could disappear. Before she could bend down to pick up the plate, a hand reached out, strong, steady, familiar. Rehan. He picked up the plate calmly, wiped it clean, and handed it back to her with a soft, reassuring look. The room suddenly fell quiet. People stared in surprise. No one expected the quiet cowboy, the man everyone respected, to step forward like that. Then, to everyone's shock, he gently took her hand. Not forcefully, not for show, but with quiet confidence, as if telling the entire town, she deserves respect. Aisha felt her heart tremble. She didn't understand why he did it, but she felt warmth spread through her chest, warmth she hadn't felt in years. The murmurs in the room stopped. The whispers died. No one laughed anymore. Rehan stood beside her, steady as the earth, making it clear he wasn't ashamed to be seen with her. That one simple gesture held more meaning than any long speech. Aisha looked at him with grateful, teary eyes. Rehan simply nodded once, as if telling her she didn't need to be afraid anymore. That night marked a turning point, one that neither of them fully understood yet. The town had always seen Aisha as someone insignificant, but now they saw her standing beside the quiet cowboy, the man whose respect meant more than anyone else's approval. And this was only the beginning. Something much bigger was waiting in the final part of her story. Something that would change the way the town looked at her forever.